Good morning, everybody.
Good
morning.
In the Zendo and you guys online. Well, I have to admit that this week I was struggling a little bit with what to talk about. The back of my ear hurts from wearing the mask, so revive my ear. Hello, ear. So what I did is some of you may remember that I used to do what I call a weekly quote, and I would put it online and write a commentary on it. So I went back and just sort of at random, I typed in my computer a weekly quote, and this is the one that came up. So it seemed to fit my mood, so I thought that I would talk about it. So this quote originally I talked about in October of 2017. And the quote is from a Zen master from the 12th century, whose name is Chome, and he said, though the river's current never fails, the water passing moment by moment is never the same. When the current cools, bubbles form on the surface, bursting and disappearing as others rise or replace them, none lasting long. In this world, people and their dwelling places are like that, always changing. So I thought, oh yeah, I can relate to this. This seems like a good thing to talk about. So I'm going to talk about impermanence and change in relationship to what I consider to be our current situation. Certainly, my talk is going to reflect my own feelings at this point in the context of our life as a culture together. So I'd say that we've seen lots of changes in the last few years. And we've all managed to muddle along in the midst of those changes. Because, really change is life. And so we just kind of do our best to roll with that. Change is what makes life happen. Even as we sometimes wish that it would stay the same. So, without impermanence, without change, we couldn't walk across a room. We couldn't form thoughts. We wouldn't have seasons. We wouldn't be able to grow food. So in short, there's no aspect of life, of our experience, that is not dependent upon impermanence, is not dependent upon essentially process. We're talking about process, right? Things interacting, intermingling, interpenetrating each other. So if I want to move my hand, all those different parts of my body have to be doing something together that's about change and impermanence in order to make that happen and to make that stop, and etc. And that just, our whole life, everything is impermanence. So impermanence is a really good thing. On the other hand, we tend to relate to impermanence as a bad thing, because what we tend to remember are the things that we don't want to change. And so those are the things that we usually think of as disrupting our life in a negative way. So we talk about impermanence usually, how do we work with that? How do we deal with that in our lives as practitioners to alleviate suffering? But when you think about it, it's everything is dependent upon impermanence. So I ask you, who wants the pandemic? Who wants to have to deal with what the pandemic has brought to us? One thing, good thing I guess it's brought to us is Zoom, is being able to do this online. We never would have been online to the extent that we're online if it weren't for this, which means that Ryuki, who's in Modesto, is right now, he's there, and Jean, who's in Scotts Valley? Sunnyvale. Jean's in Sunnyvale. Ron's in Hawaii. So, here we have 3 people who are online and couldn't be part of the Sangha if it weren't for that. So those are the good things. But I go back to the original question, who wants to deal with all the business that the negative stuff that pandemics brought about? And I have to admit, I don't. Personally, I could have done without this. Even though a lot of good things have come out of it. And yet, I just can't make things stop. and neither can you. But our life goes on without our consent. It's interesting. We think we should have consent over what happens in our lives, but actually we have no consent at all in some ways about what's happening. My body's aging all the time. So do I consider that a good thing? Well, the opposite would be a problem. But usually how I think about it is, oh, I'm getting older, I can't do this, or I've got more wrinkles, or I'm fatter, or whatever it might be, right? But the reality is, what's the flip side of that, which is I'm dead. So there's this way in which, like, what am I complaining about? So, but I do. I think, oh, I'm getting older all the time. That seems to be a problem. Or maybe my computer. My computer has a life of its own. Computer programs have a life of their own. It's very interesting. We think of them as being these kind of technical, bits and pieces of programming, etc. And yet somehow they seem to, one day they work and the next day they don't. So, and then we've got the CDC that's giving us new information all the time, which may or may not gee and how the information we're getting from the state. So, it's like all that stuff is changing. And, our mind body is saying to ourselves, gee, I think I'm going to scream if I have to wear a mask one more moment. And then some of us are saying, oh, I'm afraid of what's going to happen when I'm not wearing a mask. Am I going to get COVID? So, how do we make this transition from sickness to normalcy? How do we do that? And is this the time to do that? And of course, there's going to be this transitionary ambiguity in there between those times that we have to negotiate. So this negotiation is really difficult, I don't know if you remember, there used to be a cartoon on television called George of the Jungle. And George would swing from one, vine to another, as Tarzan is wont to do. But George had a problem in that often what happened was he would run into a tree. And he would slide, he'd like grab his vine and go right into a tree and slide down the tree. So, if we think about it, we have to grab the next vine. There's, we're swinging through this life from vine to vine. And sometimes we feel like we've run into a tree. Sometimes we feel like we've made it back home to the tree house, and our lovely couch and the book we're reading or whatever it is. And sometimes it just feels like we grab the rope and we're just sliding down the rope slowly, so it's like, that's just how it is. And it can be difficult. We don't like that. And I would say that's one of the definitions of suffering. So these in-between places, between one rope and the next, that in teachings of Buddhism is like, that's a beautiful place. These places of transitions are beautiful because they're that unknowing. Those are those moments of unknowing. And in that unknowing is where change and transformation happens. That's where we talk about what is beginner's mind. Beginner's mind is residing in that place of unknowing, in which there are many possibilities. As we start to know and understand something, then the possibilities become fewer and fewer. So in a way, that transitionary time is beautiful. It's beautiful, but it's also painful. It can also be a lot of suffering involved in that. So, and yet, we just continue on. We go on. It's quite amazing, actually. All living beings, the courage of all living beings, the courage of human beings, that we put one foot in front of the other. So we are the current. We are the water. We're the bubbles floating on the current. And as those bubbles, we're constantly bursting and reforming and making new bubbles. And this happens throughout eternity, endlessly, throughout time and space, without end. And sometimes we're able to acknowledge that this is a beautiful process. It's an amazing process that we're talking about, this life. And at other times, I would say we just feel overwhelmed by it. We just want to crawl under the covers, put them over our head and say, wake me when this one's over. But regardless of which one of these things we're experiencing, our life continues on its path. Our life just keeps going. So Cho Mei, who wrote the original quote, he lived in a really difficult time in the 12th century in Japan. This was the period between the Heian to the Kamakura period in Japan, and Dogen lived in the Kamakura period. And during this time in Japan, there were wars, threat of foreign invasion, there were earthquakes, and there were storms, and these led to fires, and like whole cities would burn down, and floods. So, that doesn't even mention all the personal, individual relationships and that were going on, as well as all the personal relationships to all these kind of catastrophic things that were happening around them. And then there's also just sickness and death, right? Old age, sickness and death, and angst and problems with your partner and all of the things that go along with being a human being. So, people were pretty anxious during that time, and they became increasingly aware of impermanence and the perils of life. And by the way, out of this kind of mental state in Japan came beautiful poetry and a beautiful way of looking at the nature of what it is to be a human being in this world. So Chobe reminded us, I think, of this situation. So we have global warming, which is bringing about droughts and storms and tsunamis. There's a pandemic, there's poverty, there's war, there's inflation, there's aggression. Even the Olympics are tainted with politics and suffering that is unnecessary. And we have Russia right now poised and determined, seemingly ready to invade the Ukraine, which is all those thousands of miles away from us, and yet it's very much about our understanding and will affect our lives as well. So, are you feeling anxious? Maybe you can't quite put your finger on why you're feeling that way, but I would suggest to you, why wouldn't we feel anxious right now? Why wouldn't our bodies, we're living in a culture in which everything seems to be in flux. We're living in a culture in which, or we're just coming out of perhaps, a culture in which, or a situation in which some invisible thing can make us sick and kill us. That's actually never not been true, but now it just seems really in our face. So why wouldn't we be anxious? And I don't know about you, but as you read things in the New York Times or whatever about the psychology of all this, we're told that actually a lot of people are a lot anxious. And that there's this kind of free-floating anxiety that we feel at a time like this. And it's understandable why we would feel that. So, we're right in the middle of the Saha world. We're always in the middle of the Saha world, but I think right now we are really aware of being in the middle of the Saha world. So the world has always been in turmoil. There's always been old age, sickness, and death. There's always been war. There's always been poverty. There's always been aggression. All of these things have always been happening. And if they're not happening here, they're happening somewhere else. And yet now it seems like all of this stuff is piling up right outside our door. So maybe you think you should be feeling better because it seems like things are getting better. Maybe closer to home, you're frustrated because at Ocean Gate, we're not responding, Jocko and I, quickly enough to opening up from the pandemic. You don't want to wear a mask anymore, or maybe you're feeling frightened because things might be moving too fast, and you're worried about some kind of peer pressure or something, and you shouldn't be, because that's not going to happen. So when times are difficult, this is our imperative to practice. This is why we practice. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. There is suffering, there is a cause of suffering, and there is a way to alleviate that suffering, and it's the Eightfold Path. So you can see, like, this is always like right there within our practice, this notion about suffering. So it's really important that we return to practice. Use those tools of practice. You might feel that this time is never going to pass. You might feel the instability of your own lives and your own situation. But as we follow the Bodhisattva path, we're being asked to keep faith in this activity of making the world better, the Bodhisattva path, one situation, one encounter at a time. So we may not know how to do this, but we should continue to try, nevertheless, by following the precepts and studying the teachings. So I think sometimes that we forget that our practice is really at heart is about navigating difficult waters. That's really what that. So it's the navigation of our own difficult waters. It's the navigation of the difficult waters of others. So to save all beings is just to say, I'm going to try to figure out how to navigate my own difficulties in a way that alleviates suffering to the point, my own suffering, so that I can bring forth my own innate wisdom. And in that way, be able to help alleviate suffering of others. So sometimes we can, it's not really a sequential practice, like first I do me, then I do the other. Sometimes we do me and sometimes we do the other, and it's like a big highway. And so sometimes you're in the far right-hand lane and sometimes you're in the far left-hand lane. So, you can't say it's got to be sequential or it's this or that. But how do we do this navigation? How do we practice? And I would say, what do we do right now? So I'm going to offer some thoughts on that. There's many practices you can do, but these are the ones that I thought of as I was writing the lecture. So I would say, begin by grounding yourself in formal practice. So the Zendo's opening up again, come to the Zendo. Take the time to sit down and meditate. So regardless of what you may think about your meditation, we can work it out, to work with your body and to work with your mind and to meditate. And if you can't come to the Zendo, then sit at home. Take 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is and be at home and just stop. Just stop and know that you're not alone. So if you can't sit, then maybe build an altar and have a devotional practice. Put a picture of a person on the altar who you admire, somebody who you would like to be like, some qualities that they have, someone who affirms for you yourself. Maybe there's a person in your own life who has always affirmed you, your grandmother or an aunt or your dad, who has always affirmed you, and you put the picture on the altar and you say, oh yes, you see me. And this way in which you cultivate this feeling of you're not alone, that there's this person who sees you, this deepest part of yourself. Light a candle, burn incense, bow. Write affirmations for yourself. Put them on the altar. So this activity, both of Zazen and doing these kinds of devotional practices, they're magic. They're kind of yoga. Yoga for the mind and the body, forms and rituals that calm our body and mind and bring us together. So we don't need to force ourselves to do these things, but I would suggest that you do them regularly. Regardless of what you think about them, just do them. And don't worry about what you think about doing them. Don't think, just have faith. Jaco and I, we go to the Zendo every day that the Zendo's open. I'll be honest, sometimes I don't want to go. It's like I wake up in the morning and say, I'd rather read the paper this morning than go to the Zendo. But going to the Zendo, for me, is a kind of manifest foundation of my priest practice. It's this foundational activity of being a teacher here at Ocean Gate, along with Jaco. It's a foundational activity for me as a priest. It's just saying, this is my vocation. And the way it's manifesting right now in my life is I go to the Zendo, open the computer, sit with Randy or Sue or whoever's here that morning that we sit with, okay? And, we just do this practice together. So I have faith that this is transformative, and that regardless of how I feel, it's a transformative practice. And that it is transforming the rest of my life's experience to engage in this practice. Does it mean that I'm always calm and I never suffer? Absolutely not. But I also have faith that something is happening here, something is going on that is efficacious and is making a difference in my life. So I'd say there's no magic bullet in this life, but there are things we can do that can transform our suffering. Another thing is we have to cultivate patience with ourselves and with others. So no matter what our current unwanted situation is, we are in the middle of it. To sit in the middle of it with a kind of patience and forbearance. Traditionally in Buddhism, patience is an antidote to anger. But I think that it's also an antidote to, say, anxiety. I think it's an antidote to any emotion that makes us want to flee. Any emotion that we say, I gotta get out of here, I want to run away from this. I'm not suggesting that you stay in an unwholesome situation. I'm just saying in general that, it is good when we're feeling this sense of wanting to flee and nothing is happening that we can put our finger on it, then maybe it's time to just sit down and stop. Maybe it's time to just sit in the middle of that and just let us have those emotions as they are. It's like Zazen. People say, oh, I can't sit Zazen because I'm thinking. Really? Thinking as Ujjayi Roshi said, are mind secretions. Our body is built to think. Our brains are built to think. There are some meditation practices, it is true, where the end game is that you have no thoughts at all. But that's not Soto Zen. We sit in the middle of our thinking and we just don't let it bother us. We sit in the middle of our thinking and there we are, we're like having this fantasy about something and we just come back to the present moment. Or we're asleep and we come back to the present moment. Maybe we're in pain and we're like trying to come back to the present moment, but the present moment is pain, So how is that? What is that like? Can I just ask myself, what is it in this moment, in this moment, in this moment, in this moment? And maybe I need to move. Maybe I need to do something different with my body to alleviate my pain and my suffering. Because if your pain and suffering is too much, you can't sit. So how do I do that? How do I alleviate that? But it's this way in which we are willing to be in the middle of our life as it is right now. And so that's what Zazen asks us to do. And thinking in the middle of our life is right now is not a problem. I was recently reading about square breathing. Have you heard about this thing, square breathing? Mm-hmm. So square breathing is where you say you breathe in, you inhale for like 10 seconds. Let's say 6 seconds. You inhale for 6 seconds. You hold your breath for 6 seconds. You exhale for 6 seconds. You hold your breath for 6 seconds. And you just do that subtly. I guess the idea is square. So that you just do that and really sit in the middle of that. And it's supposedly been proven to actually calm your body down. But let's face it, breathing in general, taking a deep breath helps to calm us down, to really bring us back. So the kind of square breath is an interesting thing to do. It's a way to calm the self, to bring ourselves back into our body. Visualize your breath coming from 6 feet under the ground, standing with your feet firmly on the ground, and bringing up all that breath and energy from way down in the earth, and then bringing it through the top of your head, way down, back again, up as far as the sky, down into the earth, connecting yourself between the heavens and the earth, bringing yourself back down to the ground. As Dogen says, use the ground to get up off the ground. The ground is both the ground, right? The ground. We cannot get up off the ground without pushing up off the ground. But the ground is also the ground of reality. We ground ourselves in reality, and that grounding helps us stand up in the midst of reality simultaneously. So just stop and see what's going on in your body and your mind first. I think that's the first step to calming yourselves down. That's the first step. In the midst of our anxiety, in the midst of our anger, our impatience, fear, sorrow, whatever this human experience is that you're having, whatever this emotion is. And I will add that this is part of realization and awakening. This is not something separate from Buddha nature. This is Buddha nature as well. To acknowledge and experience these feelings that we're having. So the whole world is changing, and it's making itself into something every moment, yet at the same time it also looks the same, while it is never at rest. So each person, each being, each situation, every moment is this bubble that bursts and replaced by the next. All of this is interbeing with each other. So this very thing that we call impermanence, this change, is a source of anxiety as well as joy. And I would say one of the ways that we work with this is remember to laugh. Remember to find that joy of the bursting bubble, rolling those bubbles and they pop and it's funny, or those big giant bubbles that people do out at the beach. They get in a bucket and they make those amazingly giant bubbles, that beautiful, amazing, all the lights reflecting off of it. So those are those bubbles too. And this impermanence of, the light flickering that makes up a rom-com, a funny movie that we laugh at, or that impermanence of a friend who's got a great sense of humor and their mind is working and they're making funny comments about what's going on and we're laughing about it. So riffing on our experience, making us laugh at its absurdity. So this too is impermanence. So there is patience and introspection, there's looking for the absurd, there's laughter and finding fun in your life. Take a walk, look out the window, watch a movie, have a beer, whatever it is, as long as the activity can bring us back to a wholesome place. Offer another perspective that is refreshing and nourishing. So, this is our karma. This is the totality emerging, the totality of all the moments of our lives and the moments of everything simultaneously functioning, emerging as a moment, as a person, as a decision, as one of these bubbles, we only see what is revealed to us. But what is revealed to us is not just what we see. It's also this amazing, wondrous chain of causal conditions that are personal, cultural, global, universal. They are hologram. So we're not separate from that. So if we feel despair because we don't know how we got here, we don't know what this is in our lives, remember that we're not outside this great matrix of life itself coming forward. So the question I ask you I would suggest to you, is not why me? The question is why not me, right? Personally, I feel really blessed in my life. I feel like I have a basic good fortune, but I do not have the expectation that will continue for the rest of my life. I absolutely know that in the rest of my life there will be devastating times, And so I want to stop and I want to just soak up the gratitude I feel for the wonders of my life. It's almost like I think about it as kind of a bank account, that we remember and just really revel in and enjoy those things in our lives and not worry about small things. So I have deep gratitude for reading the paper. We get the paper in the morning. I love to go out, pick up the paper, and read the paper and have a cup of tea. Most of the time, I love coming to the Zendo, and I like seeing all of you. And I feel deep gratitude for all of you as a Sangha that you are engaged with Ocean Gate, and that we have this practice together. And I know Jaco feels the same way. So there's great gratitude for that. I have I can afford groceries. I have a car that works, a pretty nice car, I think. I have friends, and I got water to drink here at the podium. The mouth is pretty dry. So those are just a few of the things that I feel gratitude for, and I'm sure that you all have things in your life that you feel deep gratitude towards. So make the time to acknowledge your good fortune in the midst of all this anxiety. Cultivate gratitude for what we already have, and rest in that. Because I think cultivating gratitude helps us ride out the storms when things are difficult. It's an antidote to fear and anxiety. Friends are good antidotes. In some ways, we're helpless. As I said earlier, we can't control the conditions that create COVID. We couldn't control the conditions that created drought, or war, or death. And these big things feel very far away until they're right on top of us. So karma is all these causal conditions, and we don't see the why of it. We don't understand all of the ins and outs of it. So in Buddhism, we say just this. We say things as they are. We just say, okay, just this is what it is. These are things as they are. I will rest in that. I will respond to that. Right now, I might be standing in the middle of wanting things to stop, yet they don't stop. And maybe you're realizing, as I said earlier, that you're completely stressed by this. So we have to begin with working with that by accepting that, and start there, and start by having patience with our life, with our community as it is right now, and know that everybody's doing their best. We're doing our best. So in this midst of not knowing, we shouldn't forget that our actions make a difference. That's another piece of this. Not forgetting that our actions make a difference. And that's why we practice within the context of this altruistic arena of Buddhist way. And so it's not just about alleviating our own suffering, although that's really important and should not be put on the back burner. It's the responsibility for us, each of us would take on this responsibility of making our best effort to leave things better than we found them. So if we visit our fear and our anxiety and our impatience upon each other, then we're going to suffer and other people are going to suffer. And that's why it's important to really help yourself, to try to find ways to alleviate your anxiety and to work with your own pain and suffering, because then we become more aware. It's like we're aware of what's going on. If you have a situation where you find yourself pulling away from it, but you don't know why, or you're popping off or saying things and you don't know why, if you can stop and just kind of check in with yourself and say, what am I actually feeling here? It will help you to create the buffer that you need in order to be skillful in a difficult situation. And sometimes we're just broadsided by this stuff, and then we have to just stop and say, why did I say that? What's going on for me? So if we're already suffering, which I think in general as human beings, often we are, why not just stop and breathe? Stop and think about it and let it go. Stop and cry. Stop and be grateful. The Buddha said, don't try to pave the world with leather. Put on a pair of sandals. So, that's essentially our practice. Put on a pair of sandals. Don't try to get everything else to change, or don't try to fix everything so that the whole world's covered with leather and you're never going to step on a rock. Put on a pair of shoes. So practice is how we make those shoes. Practice is how we construct those shoes. And the shoes are breath and zazen and community and gratitude and cultivating patience, faith and devotion. All of those things help us to construct those shoes in the middle of uncertainty and impermanence. So if you're having a difficult time right now, please take heart. I want to confirm for you and myself that yes, indeed, we do live in crazy times. And to remember that this is not the first crazy time in my life, nor is it the first crazy time in the world's life. And that this has pretty much been going on the whole time, whether we're aware of it or not. And that our experience of this is going to change. It's inevitable that things will change. So let's make an extra effort in practice. Let's support each other. And try to add some sanity to our lives and the lives of others. Thank you.